Then the prison was destroyed as well. Eventually, the English forgot where Alfred's body lay. Just a few years ago, in 1999, archaeologists figured out that Alfred's grave was underneath a parking lot. They dug up the parking lot and found pieces of rock that belonged to Alfred's coffin, but the bones were gone. What happened to them? No one knows. Perhaps the prison inmates found Alfred's bones. The Battle of Hastings. After Alfred died, the kings who followed had to keep fighting off Viking invasions. Alfred's son, Edward, was a strong, fierce leader who protected his kingdoms and even took some of the northern parts of England back from the Vikings. But the kings after Edward were not as successful. 200 years after Alfred's death, in the year 1013, his descendant Ethelred was defeated by a Viking king named Sweyn Forkbeard. Sweyn had a very long and bushy beard which he wore in 2 braids like a fork. He became the king of England, and Ethelred, who had to flee to Normandy, got his own nickname. He was called Ethelred the Unready because he wasn't able to keep the Vikings away. After Sweyn Forkbeard, the descendants of the Vikings ruled England for many years. But all the time, the children of the Vikings and the children of the Anglo-Saxons were living side by side, trading with each other and marrying each other. England was becoming a mix of Anglo-Saxon and Viking. The English stopped thinking of themselves as Viking or Anglo-Saxon. They were just England. But soon a whole new race of warriors would invade England. The trouble began when Edward the Confessor, who ruled England for over 20 years, began to get old. He had no sons, so his advisors decided that a nobleman named Harold should be the next king of England after Edward's death. Harold was a strong fighter with soldiers of his own who were loyal to him, and he was from Wessex, just like the great King Alfred. But Edward's distant cousin William thought he should inherit the English throne. William wasn't even English, he was French, and he lived in Normandy, the French kingdom of the Vikings. But William was married to an English princess, and he was related to the king. He protested that he should be Edward's heir, but the English advisors refused to listen. They didn't want a Norman ruler. One day William heard a startling piece of news. Harold, sailing along the coast of Wessex, had been caught in a storm and blown off course. His ship had been driven by the winds all the way across the water between England and France, and he had wrecked on the shores of Normandy. William went down to the shore and rescued Harold from the wreckage. He took Harold back up to his castle, gave him dry clothes and a place to sleep, and planned a huge feast in his honor for the next night. At the feast, Harold was seated on a dais, a raised platform for an honored guest. He was surrounded by tables draped in scarlet and gold cloth, covered with meat and drink. Jugglers and acrobats entertained him. But Harold was nervous. He knew that William wanted to be Edward's heir, and even though William was acting friendly, Harold was in William's castle, with the doors locked. Sure enough, at the end of the feast, William asked Harold to put his hands flat on the table and swear to give William the English throne. Harold was afraid to defy William in his own castle, so he put his hands on the table and swore the oath. But then William whipped the tablecloth away. The table in front of Harold was a box with the bones of saints in it. Harold had sworn an oath on sacred relics, saints' remains which were thought to have miraculous powers. Now he was bound to keep his promise. William finally let Harold go back to England. Several years later, in 1066, Edward the Confessor died. At once, William sent messengers to Harold, demanding that Harold honor his sacred promise. But Harold refused. "I will be King of England," he declared. So the English noblemen held a grand ceremony to make Harold king. But they were nervous. A bad omen hovered on the horizon, Halley's Comet. Halley's Comet comes around every 76 years, but the English didn't know this. All they knew was that a giant light was moving through the sky. They were sure that this light had some terrible meaning. "Over England," one monk wrote, "is a sign in the skies such as never been seen before." Sure enough, just as Harold was crowned, bad news came. William and his army were ready to attack. William had prepared carefully for his invasion. He landed his army far away from Harold's army, so that Harold would have to march a long way to face him. By the time Harold's soldiers arrived to fight William, they were exhausted. Harold had pushed them so quickly that many soldiers had been left along the way, but William's army was fresh and ready to fight. Harold knew that his army needed a rest, so he camped for the night on a hill. He thought that William would wait for him to come down, rather than trying to climb up the hill to fight. But William decided that he would launch an attack, even though fighting uphill is very difficult. He told his troops, "Now is the time to show strength and courage. You fight not only for victory, but for survival." The Normans charged up the hill towards the English camp, and the most famous battle in English history, the Battle of Hastings, had begun. At first the Norman attack seemed doomed to failure. The English army fought ferociously, and the Norman force began to weaken. William was knocked off his horse, and his soldiers began to shout, "The king is dead! The king is dead!" But William struggled to his feet and yanked his helmet off. "I'm still alive," he bellowed, "and by the grace of God I will still conquer." The relieved Norman soldiers threw themselves back into the battle. They surrounded the English army and overwhelmed it. Harold was killed, and the English surrendered. Harold was buried in purple robes, with the name Harold the Unfortunate carved on his tombstone. But William was given a new name too, William the Conqueror. He became the new king of England, and his fighters, who were French-speaking descendants of Vikings, were given land and castles in England. Once more, England had been invaded and conquered by a foreign people.